The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of the German presidential palace as Catalina Martinez walked nervously through the ornate gardens. Her heart pounded with each step, echoing the rhythm of her heels against the ancient stones. She had received the mysterious summons 3 days ago, a formal invitation from President Heinrich Müller requesting her presence for what he called a matter of utmost importance to both our nations. Catalina had spent sleepless nights wondering what could possibly require her attention. As a Spanish diplomat specializing in European relations, she had worked with various government officials, but never had she been personally summoned by a head of state. The ivory envelope bearing the presidential seal had arrived at her Madrid apartment, delivered by a courier who waited for her immediate response. The urgency in his manner suggested this was no ordinary diplomatic meeting. Standing before the imposing doors of the presidential office, Catalina smoothed her navy blue dress and took a deep breath. The ornate brass handles felt cold beneath her palms as she pushed open the doors to find President Müller standing by the tall windows overlooking the Rhine River. His silver hair caught the morning light, and his typically stern expression seemed softer than she remembered from their previous brief encounters at European Union summits. "Miss Martinez," he said, turning to face her with a warm smile that surprised her. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, sit down. We have much to discuss." The president's office was a study in German efficiency and elegance. Dark mahogany furniture filled the space, while portraits of previous leaders watched over them from gilded frames. Catalina took her seat in the leather chair across from the president's desk, her diplomatic training helping her maintain composure despite her growing curiosity. President Müller poured 2 cups of coffee from an ornate silver service, the steam rising between them like morning mist. "I imagine you're wondering why I've asked you here," he began, settling into his chair with a thoughtful expression. "What I'm about to tell you will change your life forever, and I want you to know that I've given this matter considerable thought over the past several months." Catalina's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. The president's serious tone and the weight of his words created an atmosphere of anticipation that made her pulse quicken. "I'm listening, Mr. President," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions building inside her. 6 months ago, our genealogical research department was conducting routine historical documentation when they made an extraordinary discovery, President Müller continued, opening a thick leather folder that lay before him. "The research was initially focused on documenting noble bloodlines for our national archives, but what they found regarding your family history was completely unexpected." He pulled out several documents, photographs, and what appeared to be ancient certificates with elaborate seals. Catalina leaned forward, trying to read the old German script, but the documents were in an archaic form that she couldn't decipher. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was this about some distant relative? A property inheritance? The possibilities seemed endless. "Catalina," the president said, using her first name for the first time, which immediately caught her attention, "these documents prove beyond any doubt that you are the direct descendant of the last legitimate queen of Catalonia, Isabella III, who fled to Germany during the Spanish succession crisis of 1714. The words hit Catalina like a physical blow. She set down her coffee cup with shaking hands, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. "I'm sorry, Mr. President, but I think there must be some mistake. My family has no royal connections. We're from a small village outside Barcelona. My parents were teachers, my grandparents were farmers." President Müller nodded understandingly. "That's exactly what we would expect. When Queen Isabella fled Catalonia, she deliberately obscured her identity to protect her children and future generations. She took the name Martinez and settled in a small German village near the Swiss border. Your great-great-great-grandmother was her direct descendant." He spread out a detailed family tree that traced Catalina's lineage back through centuries of carefully documented births, marriages, and deaths. Each generation was meticulously recorded, with corresponding historical documents and witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. "But why does this matter now?" Catalina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Catalonia hasn't had a monarchy for over 300 years. Spain itself is a constitutional monarchy with established succession laws." The president's expression grew more serious. "That's where current political developments become relevant. As you know, there's been growing tension between Catalonia and Madrid regarding independence movements. The Catalan people have been seeking greater autonomy for decades, and recent events have intensified these desires.
Catalina was indeed aware of these tensions.
Her own diplomatic work often involved mediating between Spanish federal authorities and Catalan regional governments. The independence movement had gained significant momentum in recent years, with peaceful protests and political campaigns advocating for complete separation from Spain. 3 weeks ago, President Muller continued, representatives from the Catalan parliament approached several European Union leaders, including myself, about the possibility of international recognition for an independent Catalonia. During these discussions, they mentioned their desire to establish a constitutional monarchy as a symbol of Catalan identity and legitimacy. The implications began to dawn on Catalina, and she felt the room spinning slightly.
Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, the president replied firmly. I'm telling you that based on irrefutable historical evidence, you are the rightful heir to the throne of Catalonia.
The Catalan parliament has been made aware of this discovery, and they have formally requested that I confirm your legitimate claim to the title. Catalina stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where the Rhine River flowed peacefully below. The normalcy of the scene, boats moving along the water, people walking along the embankment, seemed surreal compared to the earth-shattering revelation she was processing. "This is impossible," she said, turning back to face the president.
"I'm a diplomat, not a queen. I don't know the first thing about ruling a country or being a monarch. And, what about the current Spanish royal family?
Surely they would have claims or objections."
President Muller joined her at the window. "The Spanish crown has no legitimate claim to the Catalan throne because Catalonia was conquered, not inherited. As for your concerns about readiness, that's precisely why this process will take time.
If you choose to accept this responsibility, and I want to emphasize that it is entirely your choice, there would be extensive preparation and education." The word choice echoed in Catalina's mind. Throughout her career, she had made many important decisions, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The weight of potential responsibility for an entire people felt overwhelming. "What about Queen Camila?" she asked suddenly. Surely the Spanish royal family wouldn't simply accept this situation. There could be serious diplomatic consequences. The president's expression darkened slightly. That's another complex aspect of this situation. Queen Camila has been made aware of these developments, and, as expected, she has expressed strong opposition. However, our legal and historical experts have confirmed that her objections have no basis in law or precedent. He returned to his desk and pulled out another set of documents. These are communications from the Spanish royal household, delivered through official diplomatic channels. As you can see, they range from formal protests to what can only be described as attempts at intimidation. Catalina read through several of the documents, her diplomatic experience helping her understand the underlying tensions and political maneuvering. The Spanish crown was clearly concerned about the precedent this would set for other independence movements throughout Spain. "The truth is, Catalina," President Muller said gently, "this situation has the potential to reshape the political landscape of Europe. An independent Catalonia with historical legitimacy could influence independence movements in Scotland, Bavaria, and other regions seeking greater autonomy." The magnitude of the situation was becoming clearer, and Catalina felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders.
"How long do I have to make this decision?"
The Catalan parliament has scheduled a formal session for next month where they hope to make an official announcement.
However, I want you to know that whatever you decide, you'll have the full support of the German government. We believe in the principle of self-determination and historical justice.
Catalina walked back to her chair, her mind spinning with the implications of everything she had learned.
What would happen to my current life? My career, my relationships, my privacy?
Everything would change, the president answered honestly. If you accept the throne, you would need to relocate to Catalonia, undergo extensive preparation and education about royal duties, and essentially begin a completely new life. It would be one of the most significant sacrifices anyone could be asked to make. The honesty in his response was both refreshing and terrifying. Catalina had built a successful career in diplomacy, had close friends and a romantic relationship in Madrid, and enjoyed the relative anonymity of her current life.
The thought of giving up everything familiar was daunting. What about the people of Catalonia, she asked. Do they even want a queen? Have they been consulted about this?
President Mueller smiled for the first time since the serious conversation began. That's an excellent question, and it shows the kind of thoughtfulness that would make you an exceptional leader. The Catalan Parliament has conducted preliminary discussions with various civic groups and community leaders.
The response has been overwhelmingly positive.
He handed her a folder containing polling data and community feedback reports. As you can see, the idea of having a Catalan queen with legitimate historical claims has captured the imagination of the people. They see it as a powerful symbol of their unique identity and independence from Spain. Reading through the reports, Catalina was moved by the passionate responses from ordinary Catalans. Teachers, farmers, business owners, and students had all expressed excitement about the possibility of having their own monarch. Many spoke about the pride they would feel in having a queen who understood their language, culture, and aspirations. There's something else you should know, the president added quietly. The research that led to this discovery also revealed information about other potential heirs. You're not the only descendant of Queen Isabella, but you are the most direct and legitimate claimant. This revelation added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation.
Are there others who might challenge my claim?
There are distant cousins in various European countries, but none with as clear a lineage as yours.
More importantly, none with your qualifications and understanding of modern European politics.
The Catalan Parliament specifically requested you because of your diplomatic background and your familiarity with their situation.
As the morning wore on, Catalina found herself asking dozens of practical questions about everything from royal protocols to constitutional law.
President Mueller patiently answered each one, drawing on the extensive research his team had conducted over the past months.
What about my Spanish citizenship, she asked. Would I have to renounce it?
That would depend on the specific arrangements negotiated between Catalonia and Spain, assuming independence is achieved. Initially, you would likely hold dual citizenship, which is not uncommon for European royalty. The conversation continued for hours, covering topics ranging from historical precedents to modern constitutional monarchies. By the time they broke for lunch, Catalina's head was spinning with information, possibilities, and concerns. As they shared a simple meal in the president's private dining room, the conversation shifted to more personal matters.
Tell me, Catalina, President Mueller said, what does your heart tell you about this opportunity?
It was a question she had been avoiding, focusing instead on the practical and political implications. Taking a moment to truly consider her feelings, she was surprised by her response.
Honestly? Part of me is terrified by the enormity of it all.
But another part feels called to it, somehow. When I read those responses from the Catalan people, when I saw their hope and excitement, something inside me responded to that.
The president nodded thoughtfully. That response tells me everything I need to know about your character.
Anyone who takes on this responsibility should feel that mixture of fear and calling.
As the afternoon progressed, they discussed the timeline for decision-making and the next steps regardless of her choice.
President Mueller emphasized repeatedly that there was no pressure to accept, but also made clear the historical significance of the moment. This is bigger than any one person, he said as their meeting drew to a close.
This is about justice, self-determination, and the right of peoples to choose their own destiny.
Your decision will have implications far beyond Catalonia. When Catalina finally left the presidential palace as the sun was setting, she carried with her copies of all the documents, research materials, and contact information for various experts who could provide additional guidance. The weight of the leather briefcase containing these materials felt symbolic of the weight now resting on her shoulders. Standing in the palace courtyard where she had nervously walked that morning, Catalina realized that regardless of her decision, she was no longer the same person who had entered those doors. The knowledge of her heritage, the understanding of her potential role in history, and the responsibility to an entire people had fundamentally changed her. As she walked toward the waiting car that would take her to her hotel, Catalina caught her reflection in the palace windows.
For just a moment, she tried to imagine herself wearing a crown, addressing the Catalan parliament, representing her people on the international stage. The image was both thrilling and terrifying. The drive through the German countryside gave her time to begin processing everything she had learned. The rolling hills and quaint villages seemed to whisper of the history that connected her to this land, where her royal ancestors had found refuge centuries ago. Tomorrow, she would fly back to Madrid to begin the most difficult decision of her life. But tonight, as the car carried her through the gathering darkness, Catalina allowed herself to imagine a future she had never dreamed possible, a future where she might wear a crown not for personal glory, but for the hopes and dreams of an entire people yearning to be free. The rain drummed against the windows of Catalina's Madrid apartment as she sat surrounded by historical documents, genealogical charts, and legal opinions that had arrived by diplomatic courier over the past week. Each piece of paper seemed to carry the weight of centuries, and together they painted an undeniable picture of her royal lineage. The coffee on her desk had grown cold hours ago, but she barely noticed, lost in the maze of her thoughts and the enormity of the decision before her. Her phone had been ringing constantly since news of the discovery had somehow leaked to the Spanish media. Reporters camped outside her building, government officials requested urgent meetings, and friends called with a mixture of congratulations and concern. The peaceful anonymity of her diplomatic career had evaporated overnight, replaced by a spotlight she had never sought nor desired. The most difficult call had come from her parents in Barcelona. Her mother, Elena, had wept openly upon hearing the news, while her father, Miguel, had remained characteristically pragmatic. "Mija," he had said in his gentle voice, "we always knew you were special, but we never imagined something like this. Whatever you decide, we support you completely." Their unconditional love and support meant everything to Catalina, but it also added to the pressure she felt. If she accepted the throne, it wouldn't just change her life, it would transform theirs as well. They would go from being retired teachers in a small village to the parents of a queen, with all the scrutiny and disruption that would entail. A sharp knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Through the peephole, she could see her boyfriend, David, standing in the hallway with flowers and what appeared to be takeout from their favorite restaurant. Despite everything happening in her life, seeing his familiar face brought a moment of comfort and normalcy. "I thought you might be hungry," he said as she let him in, setting the food on her kitchen counter. "And I know you well enough to guess you've been surviving on coffee and anxiety for the past week." David Martinez, ironically sharing her assumed surname, was a fellow diplomat who worked for the Spanish Foreign Ministry. They had been together for 2 years, and their relationship had grown slowly and steadily, built on shared interests, mutual respect, and genuine affection. He was everything she had thought she wanted in a partner: stable, intelligent, supportive, and completely content with their quiet, professional life. "How are you holding up?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her as she leaned into his familiar embrace. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the comfort of being held, of being Catalina the woman rather than Catalina the potential queen. "I honestly don't know," she admitted, pulling back to look at his concerned face. "A week ago, my biggest worry was whether the trade negotiations with France would conclude successfully. Now I'm being asked to consider becoming the queen of an independent nation that doesn't even exist yet." David led her to the couch, and they sat together amid the scattered documents that had taken over her living space. He picked up one of the genealogical charts, studying it with the analytical mind that made him excellent at his job. "It's really true, isn't it?" he said quietly. "You really are descended from Catalan royalty." "According to every expert who's examined the evidence, yes. The documentation is more complete and verifiable than most European royal lineages." She gestured at the papers surrounding them. 3 different genealogical societies have confirmed it independently. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both understanding the implications of what this meant for their relationship and their future together. Finally, David spoke the words they were both thinking. "If you accept this, everything changes between us, doesn't it?" Catalina felt tears threatening for the first time since this whole situation began. "I don't know. I honestly don't know what any of this means for us, for my career, for the life we've been building together." "Have you thought about what you want to do?" he asked, taking her hand in his. "I think about it constantly, but every time I feel like I'm getting close to an answer, something else complicates the decision." She stood and walked to the window,
where she could see the reporters still gathered on the street below. This morning I received a call from Queen Camila's private secretary.
David's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Spanish queen contacted you directly?
Not directly, but close enough. The message was very polite, very diplomatic, but the underlying threat was clear. They're not going to accept this situation quietly. Catalina retrieved a formal letter from her desk, written on royal stationery with the Spanish crown's official seal.
What did it say?
Essentially, it invited me to a private meeting at the palace to discuss what they called the recent genealogical discoveries and their implications for Spanish-Catalan relations. But, reading between the lines, they want to pressure me to renounce any claims and publicly deny the legitimacy of the research. David read through the letter carefully, his diplomatic training helping him understand the subtle language of royal protocol and political maneuvering.
Are you going to meet with her? I don't see how I can avoid it. If I refuse, it looks like I'm being deliberately confrontational. If I go, I'm walking into what's essentially a trap.
Catalina returned to the couch, feeling exhausted by the complexity of navigating these unprecedented waters.
What does your heart tell you?
David asked, echoing the question President Mueller had posed days earlier.
My heart is confused, she answered honestly.
Part of me feels incredibly honored and excited by the possibility of serving the Catalan people. When I read their messages of support, when I think about being able to help them achieve the independence and recognition they've sought for so long, it feels meaningful in a way my current work has never quite achieved.
And the other part?
The other part is terrified of losing everything I've worked for, everything we've built together, everything familiar and safe about my current life. She looked at him with tears in her eyes.
I love you, David.
I love our quiet Sunday mornings, our travels together, our shared dreams about the future. If I become a queen, all of that disappears. David was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with his own emotions.
Finally, he spoke with characteristic thoughtfulness.
Catalina, I've watched you work for 2 years. I've seen how you light up when you're helping resolve conflicts, when you're bringing different parties together, when you're making a real difference in people's lives.
What you're being offered is a chance to do that on a scale most people can only dream about.
But, what about us, she asked, the question that had been haunting her since the moment President Mueller first spoke of her royal heritage. I won't lie and say it wouldn't change everything, David replied, taking her hands in both of his. But, if you turn this down because you're afraid of losing what we have, you might end up losing yourself instead.
And that wouldn't be fair to either of us.
The generosity and wisdom in his response made her love him even more, which somehow made the decision even more difficult. Here was a man who was willing to support her even if it meant losing her, and that kind of selfless love was rare and precious. Their conversation was interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, it was a courier with an urgent message from the Catalan Parliament. The letter, written in both Catalan and Spanish, formally invited her to address a joint session of regional representatives the following week. They want an answer, she said, scanning the formal invitation. They can't wait indefinitely for me to make up my mind. The next morning, Catalina found herself in the unexpected position of preparing for a meeting with Spanish royalty. The Queen's private secretary had responded to her acceptance of the meeting invitation with detailed protocols and instructions that made clear the formality and importance of the occasion. The Royal Palace of Madrid was familiar to Catalina from various diplomatic functions, but approaching it as a potential rival claimant to Spanish territory felt surreal and somewhat intimidating. The imposing Baroque architecture seemed to loom larger than usual as her official car passed through the elaborate gates. Queen Camila received her in a private sitting room adorned with centuries of Spanish royal portraits. The Queen was an elegant woman in her 60s, with silver hair styled impeccably and wearing a conservative blue suit that spoke of understated authority. Her manner was polite but cool, and Catalina could sense the underlying tension despite the formal courtesies.
Miss Martinez, the Queen began, gesturing for Catalina to take a seat across from her.
Thank you for accepting my invitation. I hope you understand that this situation requires delicate handling for the benefit of all parties involved.
Your Majesty, I appreciate your directness.
I'm still trying to understand the full implications of the recent discoveries myself. Queen Camila poured tea with practiced elegance, the ritual providing a moment of calm before addressing the serious matters at hand. "I've been on this throne for many years, Miss Martinez, and I've learned that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones that preserve stability rather than create change." The implied message was clear, but Catalina appreciated that the Queen was speaking frankly rather than hiding behind diplomatic language.
"I understand your concerns about stability, Your Majesty.
But I also have to consider the legitimate aspirations of the Catalan people. The Catalan people are Spanish citizens with full rights and representation," the Queen replied, her tone becoming slightly sharper. "They don't need a separate monarch to validate their cultural identity.
With respect, Your Majesty, that's not for either of us to decide. It's for them to choose."
The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Queen Camila presenting various arguments against Catalina accepting the Catalan throne. Some were practical concerns about the precedent it would set for other independence movements, others were legal arguments about the validity of historical claims, and still others were personal appeals about the disruption it would cause to European stability. "I want to be very clear about something," Queen Camila said as their meeting drew to a close. "If you proceed with this course of action, it will be seen as a hostile act against the Spanish crown and the Spanish people.
The consequences for Spanish-Catalan relations could be severe." Catalina met the Queen's steady gaze without flinching. "Your Majesty, I haven't made any decisions yet. But if I do choose to accept the Catalan people's invitation, it won't be out of hostility toward Spain. It will be out of respect for their right to self-determination." Leaving the palace, Catalina felt emotionally drained but also somehow clearer about her own values and priorities. The Queen's barely veiled threats had actually strengthened her resolve rather than intimidated her.
If anything, the meeting had shown her how important this decision was to the future of Catalonia and its people. That evening, she called President Muller to report on her meeting with Queen Camila. His response was both supportive and sobering. "I expected as much from the Spanish court," he said. "They're understandably concerned about the precedent, but their resistance actually validates the importance of your potential role. If this weren't significant, they wouldn't be working so hard to prevent it."
"What happens if I say yes?" Catalina asked. "What are the practical next steps?"
"The Catalan parliament would need to formally vote to establish a constitutional monarchy and invite you to accept the crown. Then, there would be extensive negotiations with Spain and the European Union about recognition, independence, and transitional arrangements. It could take years to fully resolve."
"And what happens if I say no?"
"The independence movement continues, but without the historical legitimacy and symbolic power that your acceptance would provide. It makes their path much more difficult, though not impossible." After ending the call, Catalina stood on her balcony looking out over Madrid's skyline. Somewhere out there, millions of Catalans were waiting for her decision. The weight of their hopes and dreams felt almost unbearable, but she was beginning to understand that some responsibilities couldn't be avoided simply because they were difficult. The following morning brought news that would further complicate her decision. Television reports showed massive demonstrations in Barcelona, with hundreds of thousands of Catalans marching through the streets carrying signs supporting their potential queen. The images were overwhelming: families with children, elderly couples, young activists, business owners, all united in their desire for independence and their hope that she would lead them. But the reports also showed counter-demonstrations in Madrid and other Spanish cities, with citizens expressing their opposition to Catalan independence and their anger at what they saw as foreign interference in Spanish affairs. The polarization was becoming more intense each day, and Catalina realized that regardless of her decision, the situation was rapidly moving beyond her control. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, meeting invitations, and messages of support or opposition. The most moving calls came from ordinary Catalans who had somehow obtained her number and wanted to personally express their hopes for the future. "Please, Señora," one elderly woman had said through tears, "my grandfather fought for Catalan independence and died dreaming of a free Catalonia.
You could make his dream come true."
These personal appeals touched her deeply, but they also added to the enormous pressure she felt.
How could one person be responsible for the dreams of an entire people? How could she make a decision that would affect millions of lives?
As the week progressed and the date of the Catalan parliament session approached, Catalina found herself changing her mind multiple times each day. The rational part of her brain catalogued all the reasons why accepting the throne would be impractical and, potentially disastrous. The emotional part of her heart responded to the hope and desperation she heard in every Catalan voice. On the night before she had to give her final answer, Catalina sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the documents that had started this whole journey. The genealogical charts, the historical records, the legal opinions, they all pointed to one inescapable truth: she was the rightful heir to the throne of Catalonia. But, being rightful heir and being the right person for the job were two different things entirely. As midnight approached and her phone remained silent for the first time in weeks, Catalina finally allowed herself to truly listen to her heart and consider what she really wanted for her future and for the people who were counting on her to make the right choice. The morning of the parliamentary session dawned grey and misty over Barcelona, as if the heavens themselves were uncertain about the momentous decision that would be announced that day. Catalina stood at the window of her hotel suite overlooking the Mediterranean, watching the early morning fishing boats return to port with their catch. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal given that within hours, she would either accept a crown that would change her life forever or walk away from the hopes of an entire people. She had arrived in Barcelona the previous evening to find the city transformed. Catalan flags hung from every balcony, and the streets buzzed with an energy she had never experienced before. Crowds of supporters gathered outside her hotel, singing traditional Catalan songs and holding vigil through the night. Their peaceful presence was both moving and overwhelming, a constant reminder of the weight of expectation resting on her shoulders. The decision had crystallized for her during a sleepless night of soul-searching. After weeks of agonizing over the practical implications, the political consequences, and the personal sacrifices, she had finally listened to the voice that had been whispering quietly beneath all the noise and uncertainty. The choice, when she finally made it, felt both terrifying and inevitable. A soft knock at her door interrupted her morning meditation. Her assistant, Maria, entered with the final version of the speech that would be delivered to the Parliament in 2 hours. They had worked together until nearly dawn, crafting words that would somehow capture the magnitude of the moment while remaining true to Catalina's authentic voice and feelings. "The car will be here in 30 minutes, Maria informed her quietly. "President Muller's representative arrived an hour ago and is waiting downstairs. The Catalan Parliament building is completely surrounded, but security has cleared a path for your arrival." Catalina nodded, accepting the weight of protocol that now governed her every movement. Over the past weeks, she had gradually become accustomed to the security details, the careful scheduling, and the constant presence of advisors and officials. It was a preview of the life that awaited her if she accepted the crown, a life where spontaneity and privacy would become distant memories. As she prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most important day of her life, Catalina's thoughts turned to the conversations that had led her to this moment. The phone call with her parents the night before had been particularly emotional. Her mother had cried openly, torn between pride in her daughter's potential role and fear for her safety and happiness. Her father, ever practical, had reminded her that queens throughout history had often been ordinary women who rose to extraordinary circumstances when their people needed them. The conversation with David had been even more difficult. They had spoken honestly about what her acceptance would mean for their relationship, and, while they had reached no definitive conclusions, they had both acknowledged that their paths were diverging in ways that might prove impossible to reconcile. His final words to her had been characteristically generous: "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm proud of the woman you are and the leader you're becoming." The drive through Barcelona to the Parliament building revealed a city holding its breath. Thousands of people lined the streets, many holding flowers, Catalan flags, and signs expressing support for their potential queen. Children sat on their parents' shoulders to catch a glimpse of the woman who might lead them to independence. The emotion on the faces in the crowd was overwhelming: hope, desperation, joy, and determination all mingled together in expressions that would be forever burned into Catalina's memory. The Catalan Parliament building itself was a masterpiece of modernist architecture, its clean lines and glass facades symbolizing the progressive values and democratic traditions that Catalans held dear. As Catalina's motorcade approached, she could see that every available space around the building was filled with supporters, media representatives, and curious onlookers from around the world. Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Regional representatives, civic leaders, and international observers filled the main chamber, while television cameras captured every moment for global broadcast. Catalina was escorted to a private waiting room where she spent the final minutes before her address in quiet contemplation, reviewing her speech one last time and gathering her courage for the moment that would define the rest of her life.
The introduction ceremony was steeped in Catalan tradition.
Ancient symbols of the region's heritage decorated the chamber, and a choir performed traditional songs that spoke of freedom, identity, and the enduring spirit of the Catalan people. When Catalina was finally invited to approach the podium, the entire assembly rose in respectful silence, the weight of history settling over the room like a sacred shroud. Standing before the microphone, looking out over the expectant faces of people who had placed their hopes in her hands, Catalina felt a moment of profound clarity. All the doubts, fears, and uncertainties that had plagued her for weeks seemed to fall away, replaced by a sense of purpose and calling that surprised her with its intensity. "Honorable representatives, distinguished guests, and my fellow Catalans," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions coursing through her. "I stand before you today not as someone who sought power or position, but as someone who has been called to serve by the weight of history and the hopes of our people." She spoke from the heart about her journey of discovery, about learning of her royal heritage and grappling with the enormous responsibility it represented. She talked about the sleepless nights, the difficult conversations, and the soul-searching that had brought her to this moment. Most importantly, she spoke about the letters, calls, and messages she had received from ordinary Catalans who saw in her their chance for freedom and self-determination. "I have learned that being queen is not about wearing a crown or living in palaces," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It is about serving your people with dignity, representing their hopes and dreams on the world stage, and never forgetting that true power comes from the consent and trust of those you serve."
The chamber was absolutely silent as she reached the climactic moment of her address.
"After careful consideration and much prayer, I accept your invitation to serve as your queen and to lead Catalonia toward independence, freedom, and prosperity."
The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything Catalina had ever experienced.
The entire assembly erupted in cheers, applause, and tears of joy. Many representatives wept openly, overwhelmed by the historic nature of the moment. Outside the building, the crowds that had been waiting for hours broke into spontaneous celebration, singing the Catalan anthem and dancing in the streets. But, even as she accepted the congratulations and well wishes of the parliamentary leaders, Catalina was acutely aware that this was only the beginning of an incredibly challenging journey. Accepting the crown was one thing, actually leading a newly independent nation through the complex process of establishing itself on the world stage would be something else entirely. The immediate aftermath of her announcement was a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and ceremonial obligations. European media outlets scrambled to analyze the implications of her decision, while Spanish government officials issued carefully worded statements expressing their disappointment and concern about the developments. International law experts debated the legal precedents and potential consequences, while Catalan celebration spilled into the streets of cities around the world where expatriate communities had gathered to watch the historic moment. President Muller called personally to congratulate her and to reaffirm Germany's support for Catalonia's independence movement. "You've made a brave and honorable decision," he told her. "History will remember this day as a turning point not just for Catalonia, but for the principle of self-determination throughout Europe." But the most significant conversation came later that evening, when Queen Camila's private secretary called to request an urgent meeting. The message was formal but unmistakably tense. The Spanish crown wanted to discuss the serious implications of Catalina's decision for Spanish-Catalan relations and European stability. The meeting took place 2 days later in a neutral location, the Swiss embassy in Barcelona, chosen for its symbolic representation of neutrality and diplomatic tradition. Queen Camila arrived with a small entourage of advisors, her demeanor formal and noticeably cooler than during their previous encounter in Madrid. "Your Majesty," Camila said, using the royal title for the first time, though her tone made it clear she did not recognize its legitimacy. "I had hoped we could resolve this situation through private diplomacy, but your public acceptance has forced our hand." "I understand your concerns," Catalina replied, maintaining the respectful tone she had cultivated throughout their relationship. "But I also hope you understand that I couldn't ignore the clear will of the Catalan people." What followed was perhaps one of the most tense diplomatic conversations in recent European history.
Queen Camila made it clear that Spain would not recognize Catalonia's independence or Catalina's claim to royal status.
She outlined the economic, political, and social consequences that would follow, including trade restrictions, withdrawal of Spanish government services, and potential isolation from Spanish cultural and educational institutions. "You're asking me to choose between your approval and the freedom of my people," Catalina responded when the Spanish queen finished her litany of threatened consequences. "That's not really a choice at all." "Your people are Spanish citizens," Camila retorted, her composure slipping slightly. "They have representation, rights, and protections under Spanish law. What you're offering them is uncertainty, instability, and potential economic disaster." "What I'm offering them is the right to determine their own future," Catalina replied firmly. "Something that has been denied to them for over 300 years. The conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, with neither woman yielding ground on their fundamental positions. Queen Camila made increasingly dire predictions about the consequences of Catalan independence, while Catalina remained steadfast in her conviction that the Catalan people deserved the right to choose their own destiny. As the meeting concluded without resolution, both women understood that they had crossed a point of no return. The polite diplomatic fiction that had characterized their previous interactions was no longer sustainable. They were now effectively rival monarchs representing competing visions for the future of the Iberian Peninsula. The next several weeks were a blur of intense activity as Catalina began the process of actually learning how to be a queen. Constitutional experts briefed her on the legal frameworks that would govern an independent Catalonia. Economic advisors explained the challenges and opportunities of establishing a new nation's financial systems. Security professionals outlined the protocols that would protect her and ensure the stability of the emerging government. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of this education was learning to navigate the complex web of international relations that would determine Catalonia's place in the global community. European Union officials made it clear that Catalonia's membership would not be automatic and would require unanimous approval from all existing members, including Spain. NATO representatives expressed similar concerns about the implications of Catalan independence for regional security arrangements. Through it all, Catalina was sustained by the overwhelming support she continued to receive from the Catalan people. Public opinion polls showed approval ratings exceeding 90%, and spontaneous demonstrations of support occurred daily throughout the region. Citizens organized volunteer committees to help with the transition, offered their services to the emerging government, and showered their new queen with flowers, letters, and expressions of gratitude wherever she appeared in public. But the reality of leadership also brought difficult decisions and painful sacrifices. The relationship with David, as they had both feared, proved impossible to maintain given the demands of her new role and the security restrictions that now governed her life. Their final conversation was heartbreaking for both of them, filled with love, regret, and the recognition that some choices fundamentally change everything about a person's life. "I don't regret your decision," he told her through his tears. "You're becoming the person you were always meant to be. But I do regret that we couldn't find a way to make it work between us." The personal cost of accepting the crown was becoming clearer with each passing day. Privacy, spontaneity, and the simple pleasures of ordinary life were gradually disappearing, replaced by protocol, duty, and the constant awareness that every word and action would be scrutinized by millions of people. Yet despite these sacrifices, Catalina found herself energized by the work of building a new nation. The complexity of the challenges was matched by the excitement of creating something unprecedented in modern European history. Every day brought new problems to solve, new relationships to build, and new opportunities to serve the people who had entrusted her with their dreams. As the weeks turned into months, the international community began to take notice of the remarkable transformation taking place in Catalonia. Small nations and independence movements around the world expressed solidarity and support, seeing in Catalina's success a validation of their own aspirations for self-determination. The momentum was building toward formal independence, but Catalina knew that the most difficult challenges still lay ahead. Spain was preparing its response to Catalan independence, European institutions were debating recognition, and the world was watching to see whether this peaceful revolution could succeed where so many others had failed. Standing once again at her window, this time overlooking Barcelona's Gothic quarter rather than Madrid's diplomatic district, Catalina reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in such a short time. The woman who had entered President Mueller's office as a simple diplomat had emerged as a queen preparing to lead her people into an uncertain but hopeful future. The crown she would soon wear would be heavy with responsibility, but it would also be light with the hopes and dreams of millions of Catalans who believed in the possibility of freedom. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was no longer facing them alone. She had the support of an entire people and the strength that comes from knowing you are fulfilling your destiny, no matter how difficult that destiny might be. 6 months after her dramatic acceptance of the Catalan crown, Queen Catalina stood on the balcony of the newly established royal palace in Barcelona, looking out over a transformed cityscape. The independence referendum had passed with overwhelming support, international recognition was slowly building, and the institutions of a new nation were taking shape with remarkable speed and efficiency. Yet the challenges remained enormous, and each day brought new tests of her leadership and resolve. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Plaza de Sant Jaume as Catalina prepared for what would be one of the most significant days of her reign. Today marked the formal signing of the Catalonia-European Union Association Agreement, a crucial step toward full EU membership that had required months of delicate negotiations and diplomatic maneuvering. The agreement would establish Catalonia as an autonomous territory in association with the EU while its full membership application proceeded through the complex approval process. The path to this moment had been fraught with obstacles that would have seemed insurmountable just a year earlier. Spain's initial response to Catalan independence had been swift and harsh, including economic sanctions, the withdrawal of Spanish government services, and intense diplomatic pressure on other EU nations to refuse recognition.
For weeks, it had seemed as though Catalonia might be isolated and economically strangled before it could establish itself as a viable independent state.
But Queen Catalina's background in diplomacy proved invaluable during these critical early months. Her deep understanding of European politics, combined with her genuine commitment to democratic values and peaceful resolution of conflicts, had gradually won over skeptical international observers. The fact that independence had been achieved through entirely peaceful means, with overwhelming popular support and transparent democratic processes, made it difficult for even Spain's closest allies to completely dismiss Catalonia's legitimacy. The breakthrough had come when President Müller announced Germany's formal recognition of Catalonia as an independent state, followed within days by similar announcements from France, Denmark, and several other EU nations. While Spain continued to refuse recognition and threatened various forms of retaliation, the momentum had shifted decisively in Catalonia's favor. This morning's ceremony would be attended by representatives from 18 EU nations, along with dignitaries from around the world who had come to witness this historic moment. The symbolism was powerful. A small nation that had peacefully achieved independence was being welcomed into the community of European democracies despite the opposition of a much larger neighbor. As Catalina reviewed her remarks for the ceremony, she reflected on the personal journey that had brought her to this moment. The woman who had once worried about trade negotiations now found herself managing the birth of a nation, the delicate balance of international relations, and the hopes of nearly 8 million Catalans who looked to her for leadership and inspiration. The transformation had not been without its costs. The relationship with David had ended painfully, as they had both anticipated, though they maintained a friendship built on mutual respect and shared memories of better times. Her parents had struggled to adapt to their new status as the Queen's family, requiring security protection and dealing with constant media attention that disrupted their quiet retirement. Friends from her diplomatic days found it increasingly difficult to maintain casual relationships with someone who now carried the weight of a crown and the responsibilities of sovereignty. Yet these personal sacrifices seemed small compared to the magnitude of what had been achieved. In less than a year, Catalonia had evolved from an autonomous region seeking greater independence to a functioning sovereign state with its own government, military, diplomatic corps, and international recognition. The speed of this transformation had surprised even the most optimistic independence advocates. The economic challenges had been particularly daunting in the early months. Spain's withdrawal of financial transfers and trade restrictions had created immediate hardships, while the uncertainty surrounding Catalonia's international status had spooked investors and trading partners. For a few terrifying weeks, it had seemed possible that the economic disruption might undermine public support for independence and force Catalina's government to negotiate a humiliating return to Spanish rule. But the Catalan people had demonstrated remarkable resilience and solidarity during this crisis. Citizens organized mutual aid networks, businesses adapted to new trade relationships, and the government implemented emergency measures that helped cushion the worst impacts of economic separation. International supporters, particularly in Germany and France, provided crucial assistance through trade agreements, investment partnerships, and technical expertise that helped stabilize the new nation's economy. The military situation had been equally complex. Catalonia had no existing armed forces, and Spain initially refused to negotiate the transfer of military equipment or installations located within Catalan territory. For several months, the new nation's security depended entirely on police forces and the implicit protection of European allies who made clear that any Spanish military intervention would be met with severe consequences. The solution had come through the creation of the Catalan Defense Force, a modern military organization built around principles of defensive capability and international cooperation rather than traditional power projection. With assistance from German and French military advisors, Catalonia had developed a compact but effective force focused on territorial defense, peacekeeping capabilities, and integration with European security structures. Queen Catalina's role in these developments had evolved far beyond the ceremonial functions traditionally associated with constitutional monarchy. The unique circumstances of leading a newly independent nation had required her to take an active role in governance, diplomacy, and crisis management that tested every aspect of her training and character. Her most challenging moment had come during the negotiations with Spain over the status of Catalans living in other parts of Spain and Spaniards residing in Catalonia. Hardliners in Madrid had threatened to revoke the citizenship and property rights of Catalans who supported independence, while some Catalan extremists demanded the expulsion of Spanish residents who opposed independence.
Catalina had taken a firm stand against any form of ethnic nationalism or discriminatory policies, insisting that Catalonia would welcome all residents regardless of their origins or political views. Her speech to the Catalan parliament on this issue had become one of the defining moments of her reign. "We did not seek independence to become a narrow, exclusionary state that mirrors the worst aspects of nationalism we opposed," she had declared. "We sought independence to create a society that honors all of its people and welcomes all who choose to contribute to our common future. A free Catalonia must be a Catalonia for everyone." This position had cost her some political support among radical independence advocates, but it had enormously enhanced her credibility with international observers and moderate Catalans who wanted independence without sacrificing their cosmopolitan values. The signing ceremony itself was conducted with the dignity and solemnity appropriate to such a historic occasion. The agreement document, bound in traditional Catalan colors and sealed with both the European Union and Catalan royal seals, represented months of painstaking negotiation and compromise. As Catalina affixed her signature to the text, she was acutely aware that she was writing another page in the long history of her people's struggle for self-determination. The reactions to the signing were swift and predictably divided. Spanish media denounced it as a betrayal of European unity and predicted dire consequences for both Catalonia and the EU. Catalan celebrations erupted throughout the region and in expatriate communities around the world. European commentators largely praised the peaceful resolution of what could have been a destabilizing conflict, while independence movements in Scotland, Bavaria, and other regions pointed to Catalonia's success as validation of their own aspirations. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from ordinary Catalans who gathered in the streets of Barcelona, Girona, Lleida, and Tarragona to celebrate not just independence, but the remarkable transformation their society had undergone in such a short time. The demonstrations were notably peaceful, inclusive, and focused on gratitude rather than triumphalism. In the weeks following the EU agreement signing, Queen Catalina embarked on her first official state visits as the head of an independent nation. The tour included stops in Germany, France, Denmark, and several other countries that had provided crucial support during Catalonia's transition to independence. Each visit reinforced the remarkable personal transformation she had undergone from diplomat to monarch. The protocols of state visits, the complexity of international negotiations, and the constant scrutiny of global media all required skills and stamina she had never imagined needing when President Müller first revealed her royal heritage. The visit to Germany was particularly emotional, as it represented a return to the country where her journey had begun. President Müller hosted a state dinner in her honor, and, in his toast, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. "A year ago, we were 3 people in my office discussing a genealogical discovery," he said. "Today, we celebrate the birth of a new European democracy and the fulfillment of a people's centuries-old dream of freedom."
Queen Catalina has shown us that leadership is not about power or privilege, but about service, sacrifice, and the courage to answer when history calls. During her time in Berlin, Catalina also met privately with representatives of other European independence movements who sought guidance and inspiration from Catalonia's successful transition. These conversations were among the most moving of her reign, as she encountered people whose hopes and struggles mirrored those of her own people just a few years earlier. The most important lesson we can share, she told a gathering of Scottish, Bavarian, and Corsican independence advocates, is that freedom achieved through peaceful means, with democratic legitimacy and international support, creates a foundation for lasting success. Violence and hatred only breed more violence and hatred. True independence comes from proving that you can govern yourselves better than anyone else can govern you. The return to Barcelona brought both satisfaction and sobering reminders of the work that remained to be done. While Catalonia had achieved remarkable success in establishing itself as an independent nation, significant challenges persisted. Relations with Spain remained tense and complicated, with ongoing disputes over everything from shared infrastructure to dual citizenship rights. The economic transition continued to require careful management, as Catalonia worked to establish new trade relationships while maintaining existing ones wherever possible. The development of independent institutions from scratch, courts, universities, regulatory agencies, diplomatic services, demanded enormous resources and expertise that sometimes strained the new nation's capabilities. Most challenging of all was the ongoing process of defining what kind of nation Catalonia wanted to become. Independence had been the goal for so long that relatively little attention had been paid to the specific character and values that would define the new state. Queen Catalina found herself playing a crucial role in these conversations, using her position to promote ideals of inclusivity, democracy, environmental responsibility, and European integration. One of her proudest initiatives was the establishment of the Catalonia International Development Agency, which provided assistance to other regions and people seeking peaceful paths to greater autonomy or independence. The agency's first project involved sharing expertise with Kurdish communities in Iraq, helping them develop democratic institutions and economic programs that could support their autonomous region. Having achieved our own freedom, Queen Catalina explained during the agency's launch ceremony, we have a responsibility to help others who face similar challenges. Freedom is not a zero-sum game. When one people achieves self-determination through peaceful means, it creates possibilities for others who share the same aspirations. As the first anniversary of Catalonia's independence approached, Queen Catalina reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her people to this point. The challenges had been enormous, the sacrifices significant, and the outcome uncertain until the very end. But the result, a functioning democracy, international recognition, and a people finally able to determine their own destiny, justified every difficulty they had endured. The anniversary celebration itself was planned as a reflection of Catalan values, peaceful, inclusive, culturally rich, and focused on gratitude rather than triumphalism. Representatives from around the world would attend, including some surprising participants. Even Spain had indicated that it might send a low-level delegation, suggesting that the initial hostility was gradually giving way to pragmatic acceptance of the new reality. Standing once again on the palace balcony as the anniversary approached, Queen Catalina watched the sunset paint Barcelona's skyline in shades of gold and crimson. The city below buzzed with the energy of a people who had found their voice and their place in the world. The flags flying from every building spoke not of conquest or domination, but of identity, dignity, and hope fulfilled. In her private moments, Catalina sometimes wondered about the path not taken, the quiet diplomatic career, the relationship with David, the simple pleasures of an ordinary life. But these moments of nostalgia were always brief, overwhelmed by the profound satisfaction of knowing she had answered history's call and helped her people achieve something that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. The crown she wore was indeed heavy with responsibility, but it was also light with the joy of a people finally free to write their own story. Queen Catalina of Catalonia had discovered that true nobility came not from bloodlines or ancient privileges, but from serving something larger than oneself and having the courage to lead when leadership was needed most. As night fell over the Mediterranean and the lights of Barcelona twinkled like stars reflected in the sea, Queen Catalina smiled with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had found her destiny and fulfilled it beyond her wildest dreams. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new responsibilities, but tonight she could rest in the knowledge that when history called, she had answered, and, in answering, had helped create something beautiful and lasting for generations yet to come.